Hey there. Tonight we're going somewhere old, rough around the edges, and entirely unforgiving. The Roman Empire. But not from a marble throne, not beneath golden laurels, no fancy robes or parades in your honor. Number tonight? You're no one important. You're just you, dropped into the ancient world with no warning, no sandals, and definitely no plan. So before we step into this dusty, chaotic day, if you enjoy these quiet journeys through time, feel free to like and subscribe, only if it feels right. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from? And what time is it where you are? There's something oddly comforting about sharing history across oceans and time zones. Now, dim the lights. Let the soft hum of your room become your companion, and take a deep breath. Here we go. You open your eyes to shouting voices, clucking hens, and the high-pitched cry of a baby echoing somewhere nearby. You're in a Roman insula, a kind of ancient apartment building, though building might be too generous. It's tall, it's crowded, and it's held together by dust, hope, and deeply questionable engineering. Your room? Cramped, colder than stone in winter, hotter than a clay oven in summer. The walls sweat. There's a tiny hole instead of a window. It lets in air, and also smoke, and sometimes pigeons. Your bed is a sack of straw that creaks with every movement, and possibly bites back. The blanket smells like old wool and something faintly like regret. You own a single tunic, a chipped clay cup, and, if you're lucky, a wooden comb that's missing a few teeth. There's no kitchen, no stove. Cooking indoors is banned. One spark, and the whole building could vanish. There's no toilet either, just a worn chamber pot in the corner, watching you silently like a judgmental cat. You carry it down creaking stairs, hoping not to fall or spill anything, before dumping it into the street. The walls are so thin, you hear your neighbor whispering prayers, arguing, coughing, and not arguing if you catch the meaning. The air is thick, with smoke, with mildew, with the scent of too many people and too few baths. Downstairs, someone's already baking bread. But you're not invited. That bread's for someone else. Street vendors yell out their prices. Figs, cheap wine, fish that smells like it gave up yesterday. And somewhere nearby, a Roman officer is shouting at a bleeding man who probably deserved a nap more than a punishment. You haven't even left the building, and already you're itchy, anxious, and possibly breathing lead from the water pipes. This is how your Roman morning begins. No empire to rule, no chariot to race, just a long day ahead and a pair of very sore feet. But first, you have to deal with your bladder. There's no restroom, just a long walk, a full pot, and a deep desire to not make eye contact with anyone. You make your way to a latrina, Rome's version of a public toilet. Imagine a stone bench with a row of holes. Beneath it, a shallow stream of water slowly moving, doing its best to carry away everything. There are no stalls, no privacy. People chat while squatting, debate politics, complain about their joints, and across from you, a man eats olives and does not look away. Then you spot the sponge, a communal cleaning tool, one sponge. Many strangers, soaked in vinegar, maybe. You rinse it, you wipe. You try not to think too hard. If you're wealthy, maybe you brought some moss. If you're practical, a cloth rag. If you're like most, you use what's there, and carry the quiet shared shame of a public Roman morning. And if you think you can skip this daily ritual by sneaking into an alley, think again. Public urination laws are a thing. The fines are very real. And Roman law enforcement isn't exactly famous for giving gentle warnings. Once you're done, you wash your hands. Wait, no, you don't. There's no soap, no flowing water, just a rinse from a communal basin that's seen more fingertips than a handshake competition at a senator's banquet. You walk out of the latrina feeling lighter, and just a bit more hollow inside. But hey, this is Rome, and now it's time for breakfast, if one can really call it that. You've handled your morning business, avoided a fine, and somehow didn't end up face first in a gutter. That's a win. Now comes the first meal of the day, or at least the Roman version of it. The so-called ientaculum, a Roman feast, consists of exactly two things: stale bread and watered-down wine. If you're lucky, there might be a chunk of cheese or a few wrinkled olives, but mostly there's just disappointment. Forget about coffee. The Romans didn't have it. No eggs, no bacon, no pancakes, and absolutely no oat milk anything. Breakfast isn't meant to satisfy, it's meant to keep you upright. Your bread is probably panis rusticus, a coarse, chewy mass of grain and grit baked yesterday, or the day before that. Dense enough to double as a building brick, textured like limestone, and flavored like time forgot it. The wine is thin, diluted, because even the Romans knew that showing up tipsy before sunrise was generally a bad idea, unless, of course, you were a senator. You've got no kitchen, so you eat standing in the street or hunched beside a fountain, surrounded by other groggy citizens gnawing on bread like it's bark stripped from a tree. If you've got a drop of oil or a smear of garum, that infamous fermented fish sauce, congrats. You've successfully added aromatic trauma to your otherwise sad meal. If you were rich, maybe you'd have some fruit, maybe a drizzle of honey, but you're not. You're just well off enough to avoid slavery, and just poor enough to envy your neighbor's cracked jug of goat milk. Sometimes vendors pass by with hot chickpea cakes or sweet pastries, and for a fleeting moment, you feel something close to hope. But then you remember, your coin purse is emptier than a gladiator's sympathy. So you bite the bread, pretend it's cake, and keep chewing. And that's how your day begins, with carbs, mild dehydration, and the slow realization that you'll be walking 7 miles in sandals with only stale crumbs in your belly and a wine headache from the night before. It doesn't get better, because now it's time to work. After your nutritious helping of dry bread and quiet despair, you set out into the Roman workday. And let's be honest, unless you're a senator, a poet with a generous patron, or one of the few who inherited land from a childless uncle, you're working, and you're working hard. Maybe you're hauling bricks, pushing carts, firing clay, cleaning streets, or, if fortune has truly failed you, working in the sewers. Rome needs many things: roads, aqueducts, temples, public baths, and someone has to build them. That someone is you, with bare hands, under the sun, wearing sandals with the support of a soggy leaf. The Roman workday begins early, very early. The sun isn't even up yet, but your foreman is, barking orders in Latin, waving a stick, and already sweating. If you're late, you lose your pay. Or worse, get shamed, beaten, or fired. And fired in Rome just means you now starve with your dignity intact. Your tools? A splintered shovel, a cracked bucket, and whatever strength you didn't lose yesterday. You haul bricks, carry water from a cistern that smells like wet socks and broken dreams. There are no gloves, no safety gear, just dust, heat, and the knowledge that one wrong move could end your career and your spine. If you're a craftsman, things aren't much easier. You're competing with hundreds of others selling the same clay pots, sandals, and rough-spun tunics. Prices are low. Quality doesn't matter if someone wealthier decides he just doesn't like your face. Even the higher jobs, messenger, scribe, teacher, aren't glamorous. As a courier, you're sprinting across chaotic Roman streets with scrolls under your arm and no one stepping aside. As a clerk, you're writing figures for a man who won't remember your name. And if you teach, you're trying to explain Latin to a group of senators' children who already believe they're miniature gods. And yes, the women are working too, spinning, weaving, selling produce, or managing stalls in the bustling markets, plus raising children, keeping the household in order, and trying not to die in childbirth. Multitasking, long before it had a name. After all that, you might get a short pause for lunch. Maybe, if your supervisor isn't feeling cruel or trying to impress a visiting official. So yes, you work, or you perish trying. Rome may be eternal, but your spine isn't. Somehow, you've survived the morning. No fainting, no flogging. Well done. Now comes your next challenge, navigating a Roman street. It's a chaotic, swarming obstacle course designed by someone who clearly despised personal space and public hygiene. Imagine this: the sun's at its peak, the city hums, and the street is, quite literally, alive. Rats, buzzing flies, stray mutts, chickens, beggars, traders shouting in 5 or 6 different tongues, kids dashing between carts, and pickpockets pretending to help old women while lifting your coin pouch. It's like Times Square, if Times Square had goats and no sewers. Let's talk infrastructure. Roman roads were a feat of engineering, straight, strong, and surprisingly well built, but also completely covered in a revolting blend of spilled wine, urine, vomit, animal droppings, and leftovers from last night's garum experiment gone wrong. The center of the street doubles as an open sewer. Step off the sidewalk without checking, and congratulations. Your sandal has been baptized in the holy sludge of human misery. Wagons rattle past, no speed limits, no crosswalks, and absolutely no patience. Technically, heavy carts are banned during daylight in the city, so they race through at night, in darkness, with the urgency of sleep-deprived charioteers chasing a deadline. If the wheels don't crush you, you'll likely get elbowed by a merchant, brushed by a basket, or nearly impaled by an irate fish seller screaming about spoiled eels. The air doesn't help either. It's thick with smoke from hearths, temple incense, and the distinct aroma of public toilets carried on the breeze. Oh, dead animals? They're part of the landscape. If a dog dies in the forum, someone might casually toss a rag over it and walk away like it's not their problem. Let's not forget public events, brawls that break out over bread, sudden protests, or parades for politicians that clog the streets for hours while trumpets blast slightly off fanfares directly into your ears. So yes, the Roman street is animated and most definitely out to get you. Slip on a fig, get clipped by a runaway wagon, or accidentally offend some aristocrat's pet monkey, and your day ends faster than Caesar in mid-March. And all you wanted was lentils. You're hot, you're dusty, and you're dreaming of something, anything, cold to drink. Here's the good news. You're in Rome, a city famous for its aqueducts, magnificent channels that carry fresh water all the way from the hills into the heart of the empire. Now, the bad news. That water doesn't really belong to you. Unless you're wealthy enough to live in a domus with its own private fountain, you're sharing water with thousands of your closest coughing, sneezing, not hand-washing neighbors. Your choices? Public fountains, where people fill jars, wash feet, and occasionally dunk a child for reasons that may or may not involve hygiene. And by hygiene, we mean hope. Want a better clean? Try the Thermi, Rome's public baths, they're everywhere, and everyone uses them. Sounds lovely, right? Here's the thing. The water cycles through different pools, but there's no soap, no disinfectant. And modesty is optional at best. You'll be soaking with a dozen other men, most of whom have no personal boundaries. You'll hear debates about politics, get offered socks by a stranger, and witness ear cleaning with a stick all in one bath. And that water? It's been through everyone. If you hope to feel clean, think again. You're steeping in bacteria, with maybe a hint of rosemary. Also, just so you know, Roman plumbing often used lead pipes. Yes, lead. They were masters of construction, but not chemistry. Over time, this handy indoor plumbing brought all kinds of gifts: fatigue, infertility, anemia, and in some lucky cases, a touch of madness. Want to drink something safer? Wine. Seriously. Water was viewed with suspicion, especially in poorer areas where runoff and latrines made contamination the default. Wine, diluted, is drunk by everyone. Men, women, kids. Because really, what better way to endure a collapsing empire than with a low-level buzz? Rome brought running water to the world. But for most people, every sip, every rinse, every bath is a gamble. Enjoy your aqueducts. Just don't trust them. Welcome to the Roman Empire, where suffering isn't a possibility. It's the soundtrack of your day. Stub your toe? There's no ice, no painkillers. You just limp it off and hope for the best. Break a bone? Wrap it in a rag and try not to sneeze. Get a splinter? Say goodbye to peace of mind? That's how infections start. And sometimes, how people disappear. Comfort was not a Roman priority. No ergonomic tools, no cushions, no brakes, just labor, dust, and the faint aroma of someone else's bad decision. If you're a laborer, you're lifting bricks with a hernia and a whispered prayer. If you're a soldier, you're marching 20 miles a day with raw, bleeding feet and a scorpion sting on your thigh. If you're a woman giving birth, well, welcome to a new definition of agony. Your midwife might know a chant. That's about it. Every inch of your body is one wrong move away from becoming either an open wound or a cautionary story. And unless you live near a temple with an unusually attentive priest, your best options include homemade pastes, herbal smoke, or ignoring the issue until it goes away, or you do. Anesthesia doesn't exist. Surgeries happen while you're wide awake, biting into a block of wood and trying not to pass out. Dislocated shoulder? It's shoved back into place by a man named Marcus, who once watched someone else attempt it. Dental procedure? Picture a blacksmith. Now imagine your mouth. That's the general idea. If you're enslaved or just poor, no one bothers pretending to care. You could be bleeding out in the middle of the street, and the best response you'll hear is, "Please don't stain the mosaic." Even upper-class Romans embraced pain as a badge of honor. Stoicism was the reigning mindset. Suffering in silence was a virtue. Complaining was weakness. Break your arm and cry? You weren't just hurt, you were unworthy. Real Romans endured quietly and wrote poetry about it later. So yes, pain was always lurking. It came without warning, without cure, and absolutely without sympathy. On that cheerful note, let's take a look at what happens when you actually visit a Roman doctor. Let's say you've injured yourself. Maybe it's the infected blister from yesterday, or maybe you tried shaving with a bronze blade, and now your chin looks like it lost a duel. Either way, you need help. And in ancient Rome, medical care is less about healing and more about surviving the attempt. Let's start with the fundamentals. Roman medicine is a chaotic brew of Greek philosophy, mystical improvisation, and an alarming number of leaves. At its core is the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If something feels off, one of them is out of balance. The solution? Drain something. So your doctor, who might also be your barber, grabs a knife or a leech, because bloodletting is the default fix for everything from headaches to heartbreak. Have a cough? Let's open a vein. Feeling low? Drain the sadness. Bad dreams? Maybe it's your bile acting up. Surgery? Oh yes. Romans had scalpels, forceps, even bone drills, but no anesthesia. You stay conscious for the entire event, gripping the edge of a wooden table while a man in a stained toga cuts into your body with the boldness of someone who once read about it. Antiseptics? Not quite. They might rinse the wound with wine or vinegar, which technically helps, but also burns like a divine curse. Infection is common. So is death. As for treatment, you might receive honey, or garlic, or ground beetles, or a paste made of herbs, ashes, and very particular types of animal waste. If it gets worse, you're told to sleep at a temple, pray to Asclepius, and hope your dreams deliver instructions. If none of that works, the doctor shrugs. Your family lights a candle, and your neighbors start guessing what omen your death represents. It's not that Romans didn't value health. They just hadn't quite figured out what helped and what finished you off. So next time you sneeze, be grateful for antibiotics, and that you don't live in a world where recovery begins with blood loss. After a long day of sweating, bleeding, and avoiding rogue wagons, you're starving. Time for dinner. Or as the Romans called it, cena. Just don't expect it to be comforting. Let's start with what's not on the menu. No pizza, no pasta, no tomatoes, no potatoes, no sugar, no chocolate, and definitely no coffee. None of those ingredients have been discovered, or imported, or invented. This isn't Italian cuisine. This is pre-Italy survival food. You sit down to a wooden bowl of something vaguely hot and undeniably brown. It's probably pulse, a porridge made of spelt, lentils, or beans. It tastes like wet gravel, with a hint of herb if fortune smiles on you. If not, just wet gravel. Protein is hard to come by, unless you caught it, trapped it, or managed to fish it yourself. Meat is pricey, and even when you manage to get some, it's often questionable. Refrigeration didn't exist, so Romans preserved their meat with heavy salting, smoking, or soaking it in garum, a fermented fish sauce that smells like rotten ocean and burns your soul just thinking about it. If it's a festive evening, you might get some boiled vegetables, a wedge of hardened cheese, or a rare fig. Meanwhile, wealthy Romans dined on things like roasted flamingo, stuffed dormice, and jellyfish in vinegar. Dishes that mostly scream, "Look how rich I am, and how little I value flavor." Your wine? Always diluted. Drinking it pure is seen as barbaric. But don't relax. The water it's mixed with probably isn't winning any awards either. So really, you're just choosing how fast you want to feel sick. Dessert? Maybe a handful of dried figs. Maybe some nuts. Or maybe you're fasting today. Because the calendar says it's a festival honoring a god who frowns upon indulgence. Either way, there's no tiramisu waiting for you. No sugar, no chocolate, no sweet ending. There are no napkins. You wipe your hands on a cloth passed between 10 other people, or just use the corner of your tunic and hope no one notices. By the time the meal ends, your stomach is full, but uneasy. And your breath smells like garlic, sour wine, and a soft note of existential fatigue. Still, at least you've eaten. Now all you have to do is survive Rome's nightlife. And no, it's not a peaceful stroll. After a full day of sweat, sore muscles, and fermented fish fumes, you might crave a bit of fun. something to distract you from your collapsing ceiling and the open sewer right outside. Good news, you're in Rome. Entertainment is everywhere. Bad news, most of it is horrifying. Let's start with the big one, the Colosseum, the crown jewel of Roman architecture, and the place where your soul quietly gives up. This is where crowds gather to watch men stab each other for fun, wild animals rip apart criminals, and, if the emperor is feeling theatrical, full naval battles are reenacted, with real water, real ships, and very real drowning. Tickets, free, which sounds generous, until you realize that's because the state wants you distracted while they quietly raise taxes and annex another province. You sit wedged between sweaty strangers, cheering as someone loses a limb. There's blood, sand, and the occasional dramatic execution for flair. You clap. You're not even sure why anymore. Prefer theater? Try the local amphitheater. Perhaps a tragedy you can't quite follow, or a crude comedy where the punchline involves someone pretending to insult Jupiter with a sausage. Subtlety? Not a Roman specialty. Feeling sporty? Visit the Circus Maximus. Chariot races so fast and reckless they make modern car crashes look graceful. No guardrails, no helmets, just speed, chaos, and guaranteed collisions. The crowd eats it up. They're here to place bets and watch disasters. Cheer for the wrong team, and you might have to fight your way home. And then there's street entertainment. Fire eaters, jugglers, wandering philosophers ranting to the wind. If you don't like the act, wait 5 minutes. Something louder is coming. But behind all of it, there's something brilliant. Rome didn't just distract the people. It overwhelmed them. It dazzled them, turned spectacle into anesthesia. And if none of that numbs you enough, there's always more wine. Now, let's talk justice, Roman style. Spoiler alert, it's not comforting. You've made it through the work, the food, the blood sport. You might think, surely now I can relax if I just keep my head down. That's adorable. In Rome, the law isn't there to protect you. It's there to remind you how replaceable you are. Mercy? That's a luxury reserved for statues of emperors. Legal status is everything. If you're a citizen, you technically have rights. You can't be flogged in public, unless someone important is having a bad day. Then maybe you get a proper trial. If you're a non-citizen, justice looks like a fist, a branding iron, or a swift beheading beyond the city walls. Slaves? They aren't even considered people. They're property. If a slave kills their master, even if that master was cruel or abusive, every single slave in the household could be executed, not out of justice, but to send a message. That message? Don't even think about it. If you're accused of a crime, don't expect a quiet conversation with your lawyer. Roman trials are public theater. The wealthier party shows up with witnesses, bribes, and plenty of dramatic flair. You show up with your tunic and a very bad feeling. If you can cry on cue, that might buy you some sympathy. If you have no patrons, pray to Jupiter and hope the magistrate isn't hungover. Punishments are designed not only to hurt, but to make others think twice. Thieves may be branded or have their hands shattered. Liars might get their tongues pierced. Fraud, public flogging, or exile if you're lucky. Insult the emperor? That's not jail time. That's execution, usually creative. Some crimes require punishment in front of a crowd, ideally one that cheers louder than they did for the morning's beheading. Crucifixion is especially popular. Slow, public, shameful. And it wasn't reserved for Jesus. It was standard for rebels, bandits, or anyone the state wanted to make an example of. And don't forget, law enforcement isn't there to help you. The vigils are Rome's version of police and firefighters, underpaid, overwhelmed, sometimes helpful, more often corrupt. If you get mugged, they might shrug. If you bribe them, they might help you mug someone else. So yes, Rome had laws, inscribed on stone, recited in the Forum, but they served power, not fairness. Now, let's talk gods. Because in Rome, you don't just answer to men. You live in Jupiter's territory. After surviving the streets and escaping Roman justice, you might look for comfort in religion, a little peace, a little personal meaning. But not here. In the Roman Empire, religion isn't private. It's everywhere. A constant presence of smoke, offerings, and social obligation wrapped around every breath of your day. You don't choose your gods. They're chosen for you. And there are so many. There's a god for doors, Cardia, for sewers, Cloacina, for borders, Terminus, and even mildew, Robigus. You can't walk 5 steps without passing a shrine. If you don't stop, bow, light a candle, or mutter a respectful phrase, you're not just being rude, you're taking a risk. And if your roof collapses next week, your neighbors will whisper, "Ah, he skipped the Saturnalia ritual." The Roman calendar is packed with religious festivals, dozens each year. On these days, markets close, animals are sacrificed, and the air fills with the scent of roasted bull and wet marble. You show up not only for faith, but because you're afraid not to. If the gods feel neglected, they respond with plagues, storms, or a ruined lentil harvest that spoils the neighborhood's mood. And then, there's emperor worship. The state expects you to honor the emperor not just as a leader, but as a living god. You're expected to toss incense on his altar, sing his praises in public, and above all, don't roll your eyes during the victory parade. That's dangerously close to treason. If you skip a public ceremony, stay silent during the Vestalia, or forget to toss grain into the flame, you're not just careless, you're suspicious. And in Rome, suspicion is like blood in shark-infested water. If you belong to a foreign cult, best to keep it quiet, unless it's officially tolerated. The Roman state doesn't like unfamiliar deities, unless they bring wine, taxes, or new soldiers. Roman religion isn't about what you believe, it's about what you do. You don't need to feel anything, you just need to perform the rituals, correctly, on time, and in public. And you'd better smile while sacrificing that goat. Speaking of public performance, let's climb the greasy pole of Roman ambition in the next chapter. You've bowed to the gods, narrowly avoided a lawsuit, and survived a public bath without catching anything mythological. But now comes the most exhausting part of Roman life. The Roman social ladder, a finely tuned, merciless machine where every word, every glance, even the placement of your sandal straps can make or break your future. Society here is a vertical game, but the ladder's slick with oil and lined with blades. At the top, senators, ancient wealth, togas with purple trim, land so vast it may as well have its own Senate seat. Below them, the equestrians, wealthy merchants and business elites. Then come the plebeians, that is you, the lower and working classes, just trying to hold it together. Further down, freedmen, slaves, foreigners, and that poor soul who once insulted a statue of Augustus by accident. Want to move up? You'll need a patron, a powerful figure who offers protection in exchange for, well, just about everything. Loyalty, errands, votes, and an ego massage or two. It's like having a boss, a landlord, and a possessive relative, all in one. Every morning, you participate in the salutatio. You line up outside your patron's home. You compliment his hair, smile at his moody son, then quietly ask for help A coin, a meal, a letter of recommendation. If he's generous, he might hand you a few coins and let you walk beside his litter as he travels through the forum. Congrats, you're now connected. But every step is watched, every detail scrutinized. Your clothes don't have to be stylish, but they must be spotless. Your words must be polite, your associates, carefully chosen. And whatever you do, don't appear too ambitious. That makes people nervous. If you rise too fast, others will gather to drag you back down, socially or literally. Networking is war. Gossip is a weapon. A single remark at a banquet can ruin you. The right marriage can rescue an entire bloodline. But be careful. Love is for poets. The rest of Rome marries for property and alliances. Even if you do climb high, don't relax. One bad crop, one missed ritual, or one envious rival, and it's over. You won't even hear the dagger. Now the sun sets. Surely, things calm down at night. Not in Rome. As the light fades behind the rooftops, you may think, finally, peace. But nightfall in the empire isn't soothing. It's just a different kind of threat. First, lighting. There isn't much. Unless you're rich enough to burn oil lamps all night, you're relying on moonlight, muscle memory, and blind optimism to make your way through dark alleys. Trip and fall? No one helps. They might just take your shoes. The vigiles, Rome's official night watch, are supposed to patrol, prevent fires, and keep the peace. In practice, they're overworked, underpaid, and more interested in staying out of trouble than preventing it. Some are brave. Most can be bribed. All are outnumbered, and criminals know it. Thieves, muggers, and the occasional bored ex-gladiator roam the streets like hungry cats. If you walk home alone, you're fair game. Doesn't matter who you are. Unless you're fast, well-armed, or invisible, you're at risk. Then there's fire, Rome's biggest nighttime fear. Those insula, your charming wooden apartments, are kindling, held together by timber and hope. Cooking after dark is banned for this exact reason. But hunger doesn't follow rules. One overturned lamp, and a whole neighborhood becomes a memory. The Great Fire of 64 CE didn't light itself, but once it started, it burned like the fury of a neglected god. You might think your building is safe until the smoke creeps under your door at midnight. There's no evacuation plan, just you, your tunic, a chamber pot, and your legs. You run down crumbling stairs hoping to make it out before the roof gives in. And if it's not fire, it's noise. Drunken feasts that echo down alleyways. Parades for forgotten gods. Drums, flutes, yelling. Even a senator's mistress having a meltdown can keep half the district awake. Sleep in Rome, a luxury. Silence, a myth. And safety, that's for the rich, the armed, or the exceptionally lucky. Still, the sky begins to brighten. You've almost made it. One more night survived. Then, it all begins again. Rome never truly sleeps. It prowls. It waits. And now, let's talk about ambition, the most exhausting part of Roman life. Don't carry anything that shines. Don't make eye contact. And whatever you do, don't get caught in the middle of two drunken gladiators arguing over a missing sandal. Speaking of drunk, Rome's nightlife is alive and slurring. Taverns overflow with cheap wine, off-key music, and men reciting terrible verses about Mars and women they'll never impress. Fights erupt. Dice games turn bloody. And sometimes, an irritated noble settles a personal feud by sending his slave to beat someone senseless in the street. You step into the shadows. Pretend you saw nothing. If you're a woman walking alone, good luck. After dark, Rome belongs to the desperate, the reckless, and the dangerously bored. Trying to sleep? Not much better. Your insula creaks like it's reconsidering its life choices. Rats scratch between the walls. Your neighbor coughs like a goat on its last breath. Somewhere nearby, someone's screaming. From passion? From murder? Maybe both. You bury your face into a sweaty pillow and whisper a prayer to Mercury for just one moment of peace. But there is no peace. Not here. In Rome, even the darkness is loud. And when dawn returns, you do it all over again. You woke up in a collapsing tenement, survived public toilets, chariot gridlock, blood in the sand, airborne lead, leeches, fish sauce, temple festivals, and a rooftop that almost burned you alive. You worshipped unfamiliar gods, obeyed inconsistent laws, and tried to rest through riots, rodents, and spontaneous public executions. You're filthy, exhausted, maybe contagious, and spiritually wounded by the communal sponge. And that's just day one. Would you make it to day two? Let's be honest. No, you wouldn't. Most modern humans with their smoothies and same-day shipping would collapse by mid-morning. You'd beg to return to Wi-Fi before your second bite of garum-drenched lentils. And yet, the Romans endured for centuries. And here's the maddening, magnificent part. Somehow, in the middle of this noise, this filth, this relentless grind, it worked. They built cities, aqueducts, temples, libraries, roads that still exist. They expanded across continents. They created systems of law and language, mapped stars, perfected surgery without anesthesia, and invented concrete that outlasts our skyscrapers. Their influence shaped Europe and everything that followed. Latin became the root of half the languages you hear today. Their architecture still frames our capitals and cathedrals. Their politics, senates, republics, vetoes, still echo in modern democracies. But it came at a cost. Not for the emperors, not for the marble-bathed elite, but for the everyday Roman. Life was a fight, a struggle, a balancing act of fear, ambition, and relentless adaptation. They survived because they had to, because Rome wasn't built on comfort. It was built on sweat, on scars, on blood, layer by layer, forged over centuries. And that's why it lasted. You'd trade your entire coin pouch for a hot shower and a chair with lumbar support by noon. And that's okay. You don't need to survive ancient Rome. You just need to understand it. And maybe, just maybe, appreciate that someone, somewhere, once walked these same filthy streets, so you could sit here today, clean, safe, and appropriately horrified. But expansion always brings complications, rebellions, betrayals, and those stubborn neighbors who simply refuse to accept that your army now claims their backyard. As a young woman, Rodigan grew up surrounded by tension. She would have watched ambassadors bicker, commanders trace battle lines in the sand, and scribes scramble to keep track of who was loyal this week. She wasn't raised just in silk and ceremony. She studied statecraft. She learned how to command attention and how to wear armor that didn't clash with her earrings. It's important to understand the role of Parthian noblewomen. They weren't always in the spotlight, but they were no strangers to power. Some governed cities, some orchestrated dynastic alliances, and a few, like Rodigan, became legendary not for whom they married, but for whom they defeated. And defeat she did. But that story comes later. At this point, her name already meant something. Rodigan represented more than royal blood. She embodied Parthian identity, a symbol of pride and strength. She was expected to marry a king, or become one in spirit. And she didn't seem interested in sitting on the sidelines while cities burned and provinces rebelled. While other princesses were being oiled and perfumed, Rodigan was likely studying military briefings and logistics reports. Vanity had no place in her schedule, and as fate would have it, she would one day take a vow to not wash her hair until the rebellion was crushed. Spoiler alert, it took a while. But before we reach that moment, we need to understand the rebellion that dared provoke a princess who'd rather saddle a horse than lounge in gold. The Parthian Empire, as grand as it looked on a map, was more patchwork than marble. It stretched from the Persian Gulf to the edge of Mesopotamia, held together by marriages, oaths, and the occasional sword pressed against a trembling throat. So when a rebellion ignited in the western provinces, likely in Media or Babylonia, it wasn't shocking. What was shocking was how bold the rebels were. These weren't discontented villagers. These were aristocrats, city officials, people with influence, and a serious grievance with the crown. They didn't just complain. They seized fortresses, silenced messengers, and essentially told the capital to polish its own sandals. Normally, a king would send a cousin, or a general with more ambition than brains. But this time, Rodigan went herself. Not as a figurehead, not as a ribbon-cutting royal. She took command, fully. She mounted a horse, put on armor, and made a vow that would echo for generations. She would not wash, comb, or tend to her hair until the rebellion was ended. Dramatic? Absolutely. Inconvenient for her court stylists? Without a doubt. But it wasn't about theatrics. It was about symbolism. Her unwashed, tangled hair became a banner, a reminder that the fight wasn't over. Every time a soldier saw her, dust and grit clinging to her, they remembered. Their leader wasn't indulging in beauty until they had victory. It worked. The troops didn't see a princess. They saw someone who bled as they did. Someone who was letting herself unravel alongside the war. She wasn't a figure on a throne. She was dirt, sweat, and fire. The rebels, meanwhile, likely didn't know what to think. They were expecting a diplomat, maybe a general. Instead, they got a furious, unwashed woman charging toward their gates with steel in her gaze and no patience for negotiation or shampoo. And worse, she meant it. When Rodigan rode out from the capital, there was no ceremonial send-off, no flower petals, no lyre music. She was accompanied by cavalry, dust, and the quiet urgency of an empire that needed rebellion, crushed like an overripe fig. And she looked the part. All signs of palace life were gone. Her hair, now infamous, hung heavy, tangled, like a war banner left too long in the wind. It wasn't just hair anymore. It was history in motion. In a world obsessed with appearances, Rodigan turned her own into a weapon. This campaign wasn't swift. It wasn't some single siege wrapped up with a bribe and a battering ram. The rebel cities were fortified, confident. They had expected indecision from the crown, not a battle-hardened woman galloping through the dust with iron in her gaze and fury under her helm. But Rodigan didn't falter. Her instincts were sharp, possibly sharper than many of the men who'd led before her. She used classic Parthian strategies: mobility, misdirection, sudden strikes. Her troops would appear at a city's edge, vanish like mist, then return from a different direction the next day. Reports suggest her soldiers admired her not just as a symbol, but as a commander. She didn't stay behind the lines. She was at the front, with dirt under her fingernails and silence before battle. And as the weeks dragged on, so did her hair. By the third month, her once royal locks had knotted into dusty ropes, tangled with sweat, wind, and battlefield prayers. But that only made her more fearsome to her enemies and more revered by her own. Rebels started whispering. They called her the Witch Queen, not because she conjured spells, but because no noblewoman should still be on the front lines, refusing a bath and marching like a storm. They assumed something unnatural must be at work. But there was no sorcery here, just relentless, ruthless willpower. By the time Rodigan's army surrounded the final rebel stronghold, her legend had outpaced the rebellion itself. In camps and taverns, soldiers joked that the enemy didn't fear swords. They feared the idea that she might never wash again. And they weren't entirely wrong. The last rebel city loomed, a walled fortress said to be impenetrable. Its gates had been reinforced. Its leaders dug in, confident that they could outlast her. Big mistake. Rodigan's legend had already crossed borders. The woman who refused to wash had arrived. Some claimed her hair had turned to iron. Others whispered she hadn't slept in weeks. The myths stacked up like siege towers. But Rodigan wasn't myth. She was real. And she had strategy. Instead of launching an all-out assault, she chose patience. She cut off their trade routes, intercepted messages, poisoned water supplies. The rebels had prepared for a sword fight. They got starvation. Rodigan weaponized time itself, and she waited, just beyond the walls, in a simple tent, not separate, not distant. One of them. She ate what her soldiers ate, gritty bread and wine barely above room temperature. She led patrols, inspected armor, and still never touched a comb. By then, her vow had become sacred. No one dared suggest she break it, not even as a joke. It had become a living emblem of Pathian endurance. Every knotted strand, every tangle, was a reminder. We are still in this fight. Inside the city, morale crumbled. The rebels thought time would break the enemy. Instead, time turned on them. Their food dwindled. Their leaders argued, and rumors of desertion spread like cracks through stone. Then, the moment. A side gate, left unguarded, just for an hour, out of fatigue, or maybe betrayal. One of Rodigan's scouts found it. That night, under a cloak of wind and silence, her soldiers slipped inside and opened the main gates from within. By dawn, the city was hers. Rodigan stood atop the battlements, face streaked with ash and sweat, unwashed, unshaken, unyielding. Victory wasn't declared with parades. It was declared with water. After months of dust, war, and relentless discipline, Rodigan stood before her army, not in robes, but in the battered armor she'd worn since the campaign began. Her armor was dented, her face sun-worn, and her hair, her wild, tangled hair, hung like a lion's mane made of wire, wind, and history. But she had done it. Every rebel city had fallen, every traitor silenced. And now, at last, with her vow fulfilled, she could finally do the one thing no one had dared suggest she rush. She could finally wash her hair. According to tradition, and the stories passed down through generations, Rodigan didn't summon her attendants to a golden chamber, but to a public courtyard. She wanted her soldiers, those who had bled and marched beside her, to witness the moment. Basins were brought. Oils were warmed. Combs retrieved from storage like ceremonial relics. And then, beneath the open sky, the warrior princess of Pathia, caked in the grit of war, began to wash away the months of rebellion. It was more than hygiene. It was transformation. Each knot undone was a province reclaimed. Each rinse across her scalp washed away the defiance of cities, soaking into the dirt as though the land itself were being restored. Some say she cried, others insist she laughed. But no one disputed the silence that settled across the soldiers. Hardened men, scarred and sunburned, stood motionless as Rodigan emerged. Not just clean, but reborn. There was no crown placed on her head. She didn't need one. The dust had been her diadem, her vow, more potent than any jewel. And in that moment, Pathia didn't just have a princess. It had a symbol. She could have returned to court in triumph, let the scribes write odes, and watched nobles trip over themselves with praise. But she didn't. She remained with her soldiers a little longer. She shared their meals. She listened to their stories. She stayed human, not elevated. She knew her legacy had begun, but she didn't want it forged in gold. She wanted it forged in memory. After the legendary washing of her hair, Radagon could have galloped straight to the capital, banners flying, propaganda machines whirring. But she didn't. She took the long way. City by city, she visited each reclaimed territory, walked in the streets, inspecting fortifications, ensuring no embers of revolt remained. This wasn't ceremony. It was strategy. She understood the danger of victory, how it breeds complacency. Empires don't crumble only from defeat. They decay when they forget why they fought. Radagon wanted everyone, rebels and loyalists alike, to understand. Pathian power wasn't just cavalry and coin. It was her. A woman who chose hardship over ease, who inspired loyalty not by title, but by action. And loyalty she received. People gathered to see her, not because she was royalty, but because she was real. She wasn't polished. She wasn't perfumed. She was present. She didn't bring fear. She brought accountability. She asked for updates. She heard grievances. She paid for supplies out of her own campaign coffers. Cities that had remained loyal were rewarded. Those that had rebelled were offered clemency, but only carefully and only when it was earned. By the time she reached the royal court, her return had already become legend. Scribes rushed to document her story. Artists argued over how to portray her, wild-haired and storm-forged, or glowing and transformed. Ministers whispered in private rooms. They weren't sure what to do with her. Here was a woman who had commanded armies, kept impossible vows, and returned with the loyalty of half the empire. And that presented a problem. What do you do with a princess who is more beloved than most kings? Some proposed marriage, as if that would contain her power. Others wanted to name her commander of the borders permanently. But Radagon seemed uninterested in titles, in ranks, in politics. She had already proven everything she needed to. The battlefield had been her throne, the dust, her crown, and her name, already etched in the memories of soldiers and citizens, required no marble inscription to last. She didn't need a coronation. She had already been crowned, not with gold, but with history. In the months that followed, Radagon didn't seek the spotlight, but the spotlight followed her anyway. She became a subject of poetry, sculpture, gossip, and awe, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. Every soldier who fought beneath her banner returned with a story, and each story made her larger, more enduring, more untouchable. But in the marble corridors of Pathia, where politics slithered like snakes behind embroidered curtains, her silence was disarming. She didn't boast. She didn't lobby. She didn't ask for titles or lands. She simply observed, listened, and understood. The battlefield hadn't disappeared. It had only shifted, from stone walls to whispers in candlelit rooms. Even the king, her father, or perhaps her brother, depending on which version of the tangled Pathian records you believe, had to tread lightly. Radagon wasn't merely admired. She was respected in a way few men at court could claim, not for her lineage, not for her appearance, but for her leadership, for her discipline, for her defiance. She had turned her vow into strategy, her grime into myth. And now, she kept her silence as deliberately as she had once kept her sword close. She didn't reveal her next move, perhaps because even she didn't yet know it. For the first time in years, she wasn't fighting. She wasn't leading. She was still. And that stillness was unsettling. What does a woman who conquered without a crown do next? Some believe she used that silence as leverage. Her very presence, a glance, a nod, could sway decisions. Ministers hesitated to propose foolish laws for fear she might raise an eyebrow. Generals postponed campaigns, hoping she'd speak. But she didn't. Her silence wasn't passive. It was power. She had learned that not speaking could shift more than a battlefield. And so she lingered, a living legend in palace corridors. Her hair now clean, braided, not just with gold thread, but with memory. Her existence alone defied the rules. She proved that strength didn't belong to a throne. It could ride into battle with dust in its eyes and return with cities at its feet. And all she had to do now was wait. Because sometimes the greatest act of leadership is stillness. As time passed, Rodigan's name began to fade from formal records. Pathian scribes, eager to enshrine kings and dynasties, began to downplay the campaign. The silence she had once wielded like a blade was now used as an excuse to erase. No grand mausoleum was built in her honor. No epic poem carved in golden scrolls bore her likeness. But here's the truth about legends. They don't ask for permission to endure. In the border towns where her army once marched, in the villages she spared, her name remained. A whisper, a warning, a prayer. Mothers told her story to their daughters, not as a bedtime fable, but as a reminder to any man who underestimated a woman with a mission. Soldiers remembered her tactics as if they were sacred scripture. And the rebels? Even decades later, they spoke of her as if she might still emerge from the dust, hair flying like banners, eyes sharp as history. There's something deeply unsettling about someone who breaks every rule and still wins. Rodigan wasn't content to be ornamental. She didn't play the lyre, paint birds, or perfect the art of polite invisibility. She blazed through her era like a comet, then vanished. Some say she retired quietly, choosing peace over politics. Others believe she remained in the shadows, an unseen advisor shaping empire-wide decisions. And the romantics? They claim she rode out one last time to end a border conflict, and never returned. No confirmation, no denial, only silence. But one truth remains. She may never have worn a crown, but she ruled in ways no jewel ever could. She redefined loyalty. She proved that a vow, even one as strange as refusing to comb your hair, could inspire a nation more than any decree. And though the official records may relegate her to a footnote, the dust of Pathia remembers. Because to be eternal, you don't need a statue. You just need to keep your vow and win. She became legend, not because she asked to be, but because she earned it. Not in the way kings are remembered, but in the way storms are, in the way mountains are, enduring, unmoved, immortal. Rodigan didn't conquer foreign lands or sign monumental treaties. What she conquered was expectation. In a world that told women to sit behind curtains while men spilled blood in their name, Rodigan tore the curtain down and marched out barefoot, helmet in hand. She didn't ask for command. She took it, and the empire didn't break. It followed. More importantly, she taught her people a lesson that no law could enforce. That loyalty doesn't come from fear. It comes from watching your leader bleed beside you, from seeing them choose discipline over comfort, from watching them keep a vow longer than anyone believed possible. She wasn't flawless, no legend is, but that's exactly why her story endures. Because it wasn't polished, it was tangled, dusty, honest, like her hair on that final day of victory. In that grime, there was dignity. In that vow, there was a vision of leadership stronger than any title. When her soldiers looked at her, they didn't see a royal. They saw someone who believed in the fight more than in her own reflection. And that's the part history couldn't erase. Even after Pathia crumbled and its cities dissolved into sand, her name lingered. Not in palaces, but in whispers. Mothers told her story to daughters, not as a bedtime tale, but as a warning to any man who underestimated a woman with conviction. Soldiers recited her tactics like sacred texts, and rebels, even decades later, spoke her name as if she might rise from the dust again, her hair whipping like banners in the wind. There's something deeply unsettling about someone who breaks every rule and still wins. Radagon was never content to be an ornament. She didn't paint birds. She didn't practice quietness. She burned bright and disappeared just as fast. Historians argue over where she went. Some say she retired, choosing peace. Others believe she remained behind the scenes, pulling strings in silence. A few insist she rode one last time to settle a border feud and simply vanished. No one knows. But one thing is certain. She didn't need a statue to be remembered. She didn't need a crown to rule. She redefined loyalty. She proved that a vow, even a vow as odd as not washing your hair, could become legend. And though the scribes may forget, the dust does not. Because true legacy isn't carved in stone. It's carried in the soil, in the footsteps, in the silence between battles. But even as her name faded from scrolls, another rose with the wind. Before emperors shook at her name, before blood soaked the plains, Tomias was simply a daughter of the steppe, born to wind, raised in wildness. The land she knew was not cloaked in marble, nor sung to sleep by poetry. It was endless, unforgiving, free. She belonged to the Masajte, fierce nomadic horse archers who rode like the sky's own vengeance. They lived by honor, by speed, by steel. We know little of Tomias's childhood, but we can imagine the rhythm of it. She likely rode before she walked, pulled a bowstring before she could speak clearly. Among her people, girls weren't hidden in tents. They trained beside their brothers. They rode, hunted, and fought, with fire in their blood. To lead, you had to bleed. And even as a young woman, Tomias bled for her people. Her tribe worshipped the sky, lived off herds, and buried their dead with weapons, ready to ride again in the afterlife. They had no palaces, no golden shrines, but they had pride. And when enemies came, they met them not with words, but with arrows. Tomias may have risen after the death of her husband, perhaps a tribal leader before her. But what matters is this: she didn't inherit power, she seized it. In a time when most women were considered property, Tomias commanded armies. She negotiated with kings, she spoke as an equal, and if they didn't listen, she made them. She wasn't just a queen, she was Shahut, the checkmate of the steppe, a war leader in leather and bronze who would soon face the greatest empire on earth. But power, especially in a woman's hands, never arrives without consequence. And far to the south, a king was watching. His name was Cyrus, Cyrus the Great, and he wanted more. The stage was set, the wind howled, and Tomias, daughter of the plains, was about to ride into history. They weren't wealthy in gold or palaces, but the Masajte controlled something far more valuable, the northeastern frontier, and with it, access to trade, pasture land, and strategic routes that made empires restless. More importantly, the Massagetes had pride. And to a ruler like Cyrus, pride could be bent or broken. But Cyrus was no brute in the beginning. He was a master of tactics, of charm, negotiation, manipulation. So he tried something subtler. He proposed marriage. According to ancient sources, Herodotus among them, Cyrus sent envoys to Ptolemus offering alliance through matrimony. On paper, it sounded noble, the great king of Persia and the warrior queen of the steppe. But Ptolemus wasn't naive. She saw it for what it was, a political trap dressed as a royal proposal, an attempt to absorb her people without ever drawing a sword. She declined. And in the marble halls of Persepolis, that rejection echoed like an insult. With diplomacy discarded, Cyrus returned to the language he knew best: war. He ordered his legions to cross the Araxes River, the natural barrier that divided his empire from the steppe. He intended to take by force what Ptolemus had refused to give. But Ptolemus was already preparing. She knew the terrain. She knew her warriors, swift, ruthless, unpredictable. And most of all, she knew Cyrus wasn't just coming for land. He was coming for the woman who had dared to say no. The most powerful king in the world had declared war, but he had no idea what kind of storm he had just summoned. Cyrus, seasoned conqueror, builder of an empire that stretched from Lydia to Babylon, believed he could outwit a band of horse-riding nomads. To him, the Massagetes were little more than scattered tribes, wild, fierce, but ultimately beatable. He didn't realize he was riding into the path of someone just as clever and far more furious. Ptolemus had warned him. After refusing his offer, she sent a clear message: cross the Araxes, and you will regret it. But Cyrus crossed anyway. He built a bridge of boats and stepped into her land. Ptolemus didn't attack right away. She pulled back, drawing him deeper into unfamiliar plains. Then came the bait, an abandoned camp, stocked with food and wine, a luxury her people rarely indulged in. It was a carefully set snare, and Cyrus took it. He believed the enemy had fled in panic. He left a portion of his troops behind, under the command of his trusted general, Harpagus. That night, the Massagetes returned. They descended on the sleeping, drunken Persians like a whirlwind. The fighting was swift, brutal, devastating. Among the fallen, Sparapises, Ptolemus' son, a warrior and commander. Accounts differ on how he died. Some say he was captured and took his own life to avoid dishonor. Others say he was cut down in the chaos. But all agree. When word reached Ptolemus, something within her shattered and then hardened. Grief burned through her like wildfire, but it didn't slow her. It sharpened her. She sent another message to Cyrus. This time, not a warning, a vow. You may thirst for blood, she said, but I swear, I will give you your fill. He had taken her son. He had violated her homeland. Now, he would meet not the queen of the steppe, but a mother, and the last face he would ever see. The next battle would not be strategy. It would be justice. As dawn broke across the plains, the sun rose like a blade, cutting through the horizon with cruel clarity. Ptolemus stood at the head of her army, no longer just a queen, but fury incarnate. Her warriors, faces streaked with ash and resolve, waited behind her. This wasn't about borders. This wasn't about diplomacy, not anymore. This wasn't about strategy anymore. It was about blood. Cyrus, for all his experience, for all his might, had misjudged the Massagetes. He thought they would scatter, fight like disorganized tribes, fall like the others had. But Ptolemus had grown up in the saddle. She knew war not as theory, but as rhythm. She didn't strike wildly. She struck like a scalpel, clean, precise, deliberate. And now, she was done holding back. She rallied her warriors for a full-scale assault on the Persian invaders. The exact place of the final battle is lost to time, swallowed by the endless steppe. But what remains clear is the ferocity of her attack. Her cavalry swept across the grasslands like a tide of blades. They loosed arrows from horseback, closed in with axes, and fought like people with nothing left to lose. The Persians, disciplined, hardened, veterans of countless conquests, weren't ready for this kind of fury. Timaeus wasn't just leading them, she was with them. In the fight, every charge, every scream. Her rage burned through the ranks like wildfire. Every slash was her son's name. Every fallen enemy, a reply to grief. Cyrus tried to hold the line, but the line broke. The Persian army collapsed. Some fell where they stood. Others fled into the tall grass, only to be hunted like ghosts, chasing ghosts. And Cyrus the Great, the man who took Babylon, who ruled cities beyond counting, fell. Whether he died in battle or was captured and executed later depends on the version you read. But all agree, he died on her terms. What came next became infamous. According to Herodotus, Ptolemus found Cyrus's body, ordered his head severed, and in a final act of vengeance, placed it in a wineskin filled with blood. "Drink your fill," she said, "of the blood you so desperately craved." Was it fact? Was it myth? Perhaps both. But the message was undeniable. Timaeus was not to be conquered. And when the dust finally settled, and the earth drank deep from empire's wounds, she stood victorious, a warrior queen who had brought the great king to his knees. News of the defeat spread quickly, across empires, across languages. The mighty Achaemenid Empire, the one said to be unstoppable, had been humbled by a woman from the open plains. The Persians tried to soften the story, to frame it in other terms. But Cyrus's death could not be ignored. Eventually, his remains were returned, laid to rest in a royal tomb at Pasargadae. But the shame of his final defeat lingered like a scar on the empire's legacy. For Timaeus and her people, it wasn't just revenge. It was a declaration. They had defended their sovereignty with more than weapons. They had defended it with dignity. Timaeus didn't just resist, she prevailed. And then, she disappeared. There are no surviving records of her final years, no details of her death, no grand memorial. It's as if, once her vengeance was fulfilled, she rode back into the wind and let the silence carry her story forward. In the centuries that followed, historians and poets tried to fill the gaps. Some elevated her into legend. Others struggled to reconcile her strength with their expectations of what a woman should be. To the Persians, her name was a bitter echo. To the Greeks, a paradox, a so-called barbarian who displayed more nobility than many crowned kings. To the people of Central Asia, Timaeus became something more, a spirit of the steppe, a queen of the wind, a sword that remembers. Her legacy lived on in manuscripts and myth, in whispered songs and battlefield stories, a figure not easily defined, but never truly forgotten. Renaissance artists imagined her towering over Cyrus's fallen form. In every age, Ptolemus became what people needed: a grieving mother, a wild queen, a lesson in hubris, a banner of feminine strength. But one truth cuts through the myth: she changed history. Timaeus didn't inherit a throne, she forged it in flame and fury. And for one brief, unforgettable moment, the queen of the steppe proved that not all empires rise. Some fall, beneath the hooves of warriors who ride with vengeance in their hearts. Much of what we know about Tomius comes not from her own people. The Masajte left behind no archives, no inscriptions, no temples in her name. Instead, her story survived through the pen of a Greek, Herodotus, often called the father of history. Writing nearly a century after her time, he immortalized Tomius as a queen of unshakable resolve and terrifying vengeance. But Herodotus didn't just document, he crafted. His accounts were part chronicle, part moral fable. To his Greek audience, Tomius was the ultimate reversal, a figure who shattered imperial arrogance. Cyrus the Great, conqueror of nations, fell not to a rival king, but to a woman who fought not for glory, but for her child. Herodotus detailed her revenge: the severed head, the wineskin of blood, the immortal words, "Drink your fill." Was it literal? Symbolic? Modern historians still debate it. Some argue Herodotus embellished the tale, using Tomius as a tool to humble Persian pride. Others believe the core is true, that Cyrus died in her lands, and the legend grew from the truth like a banner in the wind. Still, Herodotus did one thing no one else did. He made her unforgettable. He ensured she would not vanish into the margins of time. Because of him, Tomius passed beyond record into myth. In that strange realm between fact and memory, she became timeless. She didn't rule a great city. She didn't mint coins or carve decrees into golden tablets. Her people, the Masajte, were nomads. They lived by rhythm, not walls, by sky and grass, not marble and column. And so, Tomius's legacy wasn't institutionalized. It was remembered through stories around campfires, through songs sung beneath stars, through whispered vows passed from warrior to warrior. The Masajte were one of many fierce tribes that roamed the great central steppe. Their cousins, the Scythians, Saka and Dahai, lived much the same, on horseback, with bows in hand and no fear in their bones. Among these cultures, women held freedoms rare in the ancient world. They rode, they hunted, they led. Archaeological digs have uncovered Scythian graves filled with weapons, armor, and the bones of women warriors. Tomius wasn't an exception. She was the pinnacle. Her power didn't come from divine right. It came from respect, from blood, from the strength to lead in a world that bowed only to force. And yet, because the Masajte left no monuments, Tomius became a ghost, a queen remembered only through foreign pens and the wind's memory. To Persian scribes, she was a warning. To Greek thinkers, a paradox. And to her own people, she was a shadow that galloped beside them, not seen, but always felt. Empires rise in stone and crumble in silence, but stories of the steppe live on in motion, in wind, in hooves, in breath. Tomius, fierce, grieving, and unbroken, became its voice. Centuries passed. The great Persian Empire endured, fought Alexander, then faded into dust. But she remained, not in the palaces of kings, but in the minds of those who refused to kneel. Across Central Asia, her name lived on, not as queen, but as symbol of resistance, of feminine power, of the wildness that even empires could not tame. Because in the end, Tomius wasn't remembered because she ruled. She was remembered because she refused to be ruled. She was not Roman, not Greek, not Persian. Her story belonged to no empire, and that made her both dangerous and inspiring. In the medieval Islamic world, chroniclers occasionally mentioned her, her name reshaped by language, but never quite lost. In some versions, she was a figure of justice and righteous vengeance. In others, a savage queen, a reminder that power in a woman's hands could be both glorious and terrifying. By the time the Renaissance arrived, European scholars rediscovered her through the writings of Herodotus. Artists began to paint her, draped in elaborate armor, standing triumphant over the lifeless body of Cyrus. In one particularly dramatic scene, she holds his severed head aloft, blood-soaked, victorious, unyielding. It was art, it was theater, but it was also political. These painters were drawn to the idea of a woman who didn't just survive a man's world, she conquered it. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Ptolemais emerged as a nationalist icon in regions like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. Poets and educators reclaimed her, not as myth, but as historical heroine, a fierce reminder that Central Asian identity was proud, unyielding, and deeply feminine. Her image appeared in textbooks, in statues, in military ceremonies. The woman who once rode with a bow now rode again, through memory, through legend, through pride. In a world still uncertain about what to do with powerful women, Ptolemais remains a challenge. She wasn't gentle, she wasn't perfect, she wasn't saintly, she was fierce, she was principled, she was brutal when she had to be, compassionate when it mattered. She was resistance made flesh, and the blood of empire on her hands was a crown she wore without apology. History tends to favor the ones who build monuments, write the laws, and carve their names into marble. Ptolemais did none of that. She left no city, no golden temple, no signature pressed into wax, and yet her name endures, not because she ruled forever, but because she refused to be erased. She challenges how history remembers women, not as companions, not as afterthoughts, but as forces. Ptolemais didn't wait to be remembered. She made herself unforgettable. She didn't follow behind a king. She faced one, and she won. Her story is told from Central Asian classrooms to European lecture halls, not simply because she defeated Cyrus the Great, but because she dared to defy him. She wasn't defending a crown. She was defending freedom, a freedom that galloped beneath the stars, that rode with hawks, that hunted through the silence of the steppe, a freedom that could not and cannot be mapped. Today, her face appears on coins. Her statues rise in capital cities. To the modern descendants of the steppe, Ptolemais is more than a queen. She is the queen, a link to a past that predates empires and religions, a past not built on submission, but on defiance and the thunder of hooves. In a world still wrestling with power, with gender, with memory, Ptolemais is a beacon, not because she killed a king, but because she reminded us that dignity is not given, it is seized. That sometimes leadership doesn't look like a golden crown, but like a grieving mother who refuses to let her son's killer walk away. We often ask why some names survive while others vanish. Ptolemais survived because she made forgetting impossible. In an age when women were expected to vanish into the shadows, she rose, blade in hand, fire in heart, and carved her legacy into the very bones of empire. Empires fall, statues crack, marble crumbles, but legends ride, and somewhere, in the whispering winds of the steppe, a queen still gallops, unbroken, undefeated, and utterly unforgettable. It was a sacred craft, woven into the fabric of Egyptian life. Beekeeping wasn't a pastime. It was a practice rooted in agriculture, medicine, spirituality, and even the afterlife. The Egyptians used horizontal clay hives, tubes of terracotta laid on their sides and stacked in rows. Nothing like modern wooden boxes. These looked more like ancient drain pipes, designed not only for function, but for movement. As the Nile's floodwaters retreated and wildflowers bloomed along its banks, beekeepers would shift their hives up and down the river, following the nectar's rhythm, a kind of ancient GPS, but for bees. Smoke was blown through clay or stone pipes to calm the hives before extraction. There were no suits, no veils, only timing, instinct, and courage. Honeycombs were removed by hand. The honey collected not just for food, but for healing, mummification, and ritual. Honey was seen as a divine substance, a gift from the gods, specifically from Ra, the sun god. According to Egyptian myth, bees were born from Ra's tears as they fell to earth, not merely poetic. It shaped how Egyptians treated bees, as messengers between this world and the next. Honey was offered in temples, used in funerary rites, and even served as currency. It was medicine too. Ancient medical papyri list honey in more than 500 treatments, mixed with herbs, wine, or milk to treat wounds, infections, and digestive issues. Its antibacterial qualities were known, even if the chemistry wasn't. Beeswax also held its place, in cosmetics, in embalming, and even as writing material for scribes who pressed styluses into waxed tablets. In Egypt, the hive wasn't just a place of sweetness. It was a symbol of balance, of healing, of celestial order, carefully tended under the watch of both humans and gods. While Egypt brought structure and sanctity to beekeeping, Mesopotamia brought something equally crucial: law. The cradle of civilization didn't just invent writing, irrigation, and cities. They also recognized the value of honey and the need to protect it. Though Mesopotamian apiculture wasn't depicted in vivid tomb murals, its traces remain in cuneiform tablets and early legal codes. In Sumerian times, and later under Akkadian and Babylonian rule, there are references to nins, meaning bee gardens or apiaries. These were often tied to temples or royal estates, suggesting honey production was a privilege, and a tightly controlled one. Honey and beeswax were used for offerings, medicinal preparations, food, and trade. And losing a hive? That wasn't just misfortune. It could be financial ruin. The clearest example comes from the Code of Hammurabi, around 1750 BCE. While most of the code famously concerns theft, injury, and property disputes, a few lines deal directly with bees. If someone's hive swarmed into another's fields and caused damage, they were held responsible. If honey was stolen, compensation had to be made, sometimes in silver, sometimes in jars. In a world where nearly everything was measured in grain, the fact that honey warranted its own legal category says everything. The Mesopotamians saw bees as more than just insects. In certain texts, they were described as divine messengers, linked to Ninut, a deity of agriculture and war. Beeswax held particular value. It was used to seal documents, form ritual figurines, and bridge the gap between the practical and the mystical. It belonged equally to the world of bureaucracy and of magic. We don't have a complete picture of what Mesopotamian hives looked like, but scholars believe they may have resembled early Levantine designs, woven baskets or mud brick cylinders, stored in shaded gardens or on rooftops to guard against the brutal summer heat. Mesopotamian apiculture was less a matter of worship and more a matter of order, of regulating resources, ensuring fairness, and maintaining balance in a world where even a bee sting could end in litigation. In that sense, the hive was more than a wonder of nature. It was a symbol of civilization, a miniature model of law, cooperation, and the civilizing impulse itself. Meanwhile, in the highlands of Anatolia, long before Greek drama echoed through marble halls, the Hittites were perfecting their own sacred relationship with bees. To the Hittites, bees weren't just useful. They were spiritual agents, bridges between realms. Unlike Egypt and Mesopotamia, where apiculture was practical and ceremonial, the Hittites approached beekeeping with reverence. In ritual texts from the 14th and 13th centuries BCE, bees are called upon directly. One ritual describes summoning a bee to carry away impurity, evil, and divine wrath. And then, the bee is released, not killed. A rare gesture of mercy in ancient rites, suggesting a deep respect for the creature itself. Honey, for the Hittites, wasn't just eaten. It was poured in libations, mixed into grain offerings, used in anointing rituals, and burned in sacred ceremonies. It became a conduit, a way to carry human intent into the ears of the gods. Hittite hives were likely made of straw, mud, or clay, similar to Egyptian styles, and stored in sheltered enclosures near temples or royal estates. Beekeepers probably worked under temple supervision, their labor timed with seasonal festivals and religious events. Honey wasn't a commodity. It was an offering, a tool for diplomacy, a healer of wounds both physical and spiritual. The bee, small, quiet, easily overlooked, carried weight far beyond its size. And the Hittites gave the world an essential insight. They recognized bee migration. Surviving records describe how blooming patterns affected honey yields, an early understanding of how bees move with the land. In Anatolia, the hum of the hive wasn't just background sound. It was sacred, a low vibration that connected earth and sky, mortals and gods. The Greeks, when they came into their own, didn't just observe bees. They admired them, feared them, studied them, and in many ways, modeled their society after them. To the Greeks, a beehive wasn't just a source of sweetness. It was an ideal, a metaphor for the perfect polis, ordered, self-sustaining, divine. Greek beekeepers elevated apiculture with both practical skill and philosophical flair. Unlike older civilizations that used fixed clay tubes, the Greeks designed terracotta hives with removable sections. These early innovations allowed honey to be harvested without destroying the colony. It was an early step toward sustainability. They also mastered smoke. Using clay bellows and ceramic smokers, they calmed their hives before gathering the harvest. Fewer stings, less damage, more honey. One of the most influential thinkers of the ancient world, Aristotle, studied bees in remarkable detail. In his Historia Animalium, he described hive behavior, noting roles, patterns, hierarchies. He believed the hive had a king. He was wrong about the gender, but right about the structure. And his work laid the foundation for centuries of bee science. Honey held a special place in Greek life. It was mixed with wine, used to preserve fruits, baked into cakes, and applied as medicine, especially for wounds. To the Greeks, honey wasn't just food. It was divine. They believed that ambrosia, the food of the gods, was made from honey and wine. And bees themselves held mythological weight. They were sacred to Artemis, goddess of the wild. They were tied to Demeter, goddess of harvest. Priestesses of Artemis were called Melissa, the Greek word for bees. The bee became a symbol of sacred femininity, of purity and wildness, of fierce, organized power. For the Greeks, the hive was both a scientific marvel and a spiritual emblem, a reminder that even the smallest creatures moved with discipline, harmony, and purpose. To study bees was to study the laws of nature, and perhaps the intentions of the gods themselves. But if the Greeks approached bees with wonder, the Romans approached them with ambition. Beekeeping in the Roman world was no cottage industry. It scaled, just like everything else in the empire. From the vineyards of Gaul to the hills of Hispania, Rome transformed the humble hive into a vast, interconnected enterprise. They inherited much from the Greeks and Etruscans, but developed it further, turning apiculture into formalized agricultural science. Writers like Varro and Columella left behind detailed manuals: how to build hives, track swarms, prevent pests, and time your harvests with seasonal blooms. Their observations feel remarkably modern. Roman hives took many forms: hollow logs, cork bark vessels, clay tubes, and basket hives sealed with mud or dung. The key was flexibility. Colder provinces required insulation, warmer regions demanded ventilation, and Roman ingenuity adapted. To calm the bees, they used clay pots filled with smoldering herbs, thyme, oregano, and other fragrant leaves. The smoke subdued the hives and perhaps gently flavored the honey. Honeycombs were harvested with iron knives. Wax was melted and strained, and the byproducts? Everywhere. Beeswax was used in candles, cosmetics, writing tablets, and even to waterproof ships. Honey sweetened wine into mulsum, flavored sauces for meat and fish, and provided energy for athletes and soldiers alike. Roman physicians, drawing on Hippocratic teachings, prescribed honey for sore throats, wounds, fevers, and stomach ailments. Its healing properties were known, even if the science wasn't. But the most Roman aspect of all was the organization. Large rural estates often had dedicated honey farms, managed by enslaved labor and overseen by estate administrators. Production was tracked in ledgers, surplus sold or exported. Hives operated like departments in a living economy. Bees weren't just insects. They were model citizens, obedient, efficient, and endlessly productive. A well-run hive reflected a well-run household. And across the ancient world, bees held more than economic value. They buzzed between worlds. In Egypt, they were born from the tears of Ra, the sun god. Divine messengers carrying sweetness to the living and offerings to the dead. Honey was placed in tombs, poured in temples, and tied to royal identity. Pharaohs of Lower Egypt even bore the title "He of the Sedge and the Bee," linking their reign to divine balance. In Greece, bees carried profound feminine symbolism. The priestesses of Demeter and Artemis were known as Melissa, the bees. They were considered oracles, guardians of sacred places, and vessels of divine speech. Even the famed Oracle of Delphi, the Pythia, was sometimes called the Delphic bee. To Greek philosophers, the hive represented the ideal city: disciplined, industrious, selfless. Stoics admired bees for their instinctual duty, and in time, Christian monks adopted the bee as a symbol of purity and resurrection, creatures that created life but knew no lust. In Mesopotamia, bees had a magical function. They were summoned in purification rituals, used to carry sin and illness away on tiny wings. Honey and wax were burned in sacred fires, embedded in protective charms, and used in medicinal texts to bless, to cleanse, to heal. Among the Hittites, bees were not killed after ritual use. They were released. A rare act of mercy that revealed reverence, not fear. Across cultures and centuries, the hum of the hive was more than background noise. It was the rhythm of divine order, the heartbeat of balance, the breath between worlds. The bee was never just a metaphor. It was a bridge. A creature that moved through hidden spaces in nature, creating golden food without taking life, and stinging only in defense. To the ancient world, bees weren't merely miraculous. They were mystical. And honey, it wasn't just sweet. It was sacred. Long before microbes were known, people understood, intuitively, that honey could clean wounds, ease a cough, and preserve the body after death. It wasn't magic. though it often felt like it. It was chemistry, centuries ahead of its formal discovery. In ancient Egypt, honey was a cornerstone of healing. Medical scrolls like the Eber's Papyrus, written around 1550 BCE, mention honey in over 500 prescriptions. It was mixed with milk, garlic, figs, and herbs, used to treat eye infections, burns, digestive issues, and much more. Combined with animal fat or resin, it was applied as a salve. Wounds treated with honey healed faster, resisted infection. Though they couldn't name it, they knew its acidity and mild hydrogen peroxide effect worked. The Greeks carried on this wisdom. Hippocrates, the father of Western medicine, used honey for respiratory ailments, ulcers, and exhaustion. He mixed it with vinegar to create oxymel, a tonic for clearing phlegm and lowering fevers. Olympic athletes drank honey water to restore strength, believing it outperformed wine or plain water in speed and endurance. In India, the Ayurvedic tradition gave honey, called madhu, a central place. Texts classified honey by flavor, source, and healing strength. Ayurvedic physicians warned against heating honey, but praised it for its power to treat colds, indigestion, wounds, and even poison. It was offered to gods, consumed in sacred fasts, used in both body and soul purification. The Romans believed deeply in honey's healing power too. Pliny the Elder, in his Natural History, recorded dozens of remedies. Honey was a base for ointments, throat gargles, even battlefield treatments. Mixed with poppy juice, it became a mild sedative. Roman surgeons used it to cleanse wounds, reduce swelling, and encourage healing. Beeswax had its own role in medicine, as a base for balms, plasters, and even early dental fillings. It was malleable, long-lasting, resistant to decay. Honey didn't just delight the tongue, it saved lives, it preserved the dead, it embodied purity, a divine pharmacy delivered on wings. Ancient beekeepers were not mere farmers. They were inventors, observers, and patient engineers. Across cultures, they designed tools and techniques to manage colonies, extract honey gently, and defend themselves when needed. One of the most transformative innovations was the hive itself. Egyptians crafted horizontal terracotta tubes, stacked in rows, to mimic the bees' natural cavities. These hives were durable, portable, and perfectly suited to the rhythm of Nile agriculture. In Greece and Rome, terracotta and woven basket hives emerged, some with removable lids to access combs without destroying the hive. This shift, harvesting without harming, paved the way for sustainable beekeeping. To calm the bees, ancient apiarists used smoke. The Greeks developed clay smokers and bellows to direct it through hive entrances. Smoke masked the alarm pheromones released by guard bees, reducing aggression and allowing peaceful access. The Romans refined the technique. They added thyme, oregano, and other fragrant herbs, not only to pacify the bees, but perhaps to subtly flavor the honey itself. Harvesting tools varied by region. Some used bronze or wooden knives to slice honeycomb with care. Precision passed down from one generation to the next. Sometimes the honeycomb was gently pressed to extract the golden liquid, and the leftover wax melted, filtered, and stored for later use. Protection was minimal. There were no suits, no gloves, just experience, timing, and quiet confidence. Beekeepers relied on calm movements, a steady breath, and the rhythms they had learned by heart. Ancient writings reveal a deep understanding of bee behavior. They observed swarm cycles, recognized seasonal shifts, and knew when to move their hives to follow blooming flowers, a practice we now call transhumance. Long before modern migratory beekeeping, they were already guiding their hives along the path of nectar. Honey storage was equally refined. The Egyptians sealed honey in ceramic jars, protecting it from moisture and decay. Some of these jars, found unopened in tombs, still held edible honey after thousands of years. Even the relationship between humans and bees was cultivated with care. Rituals were performed, offerings made, prayers whispered, to honor the spirits of bees and secure their cooperation. This spiritual attention was as important as the physical tools of the trade. Because beekeeping, in the ancient world, was never just a task. It was an art, a science, a sacred trust. The tools and techniques they developed in hive design, smoke use, and seasonal management laid the groundwork for everything we know about apiculture today. Ancient beekeeping was more than agriculture. It was a philosophy. It influenced medicine, religion, economy, and ecology. From the Nile to Anatolia, from Greek temples to Roman farms, beekeepers nurtured colonies with patience and skill. They learned to harvest without harming, to live with the hive, not over it. Their understanding of bee cycles, honey's healing power, and the balance of nature created a model of harmony that still resonates. Honey's antibacterial and preservative qualities informed the earliest medical texts. Its sweetness soothed not only the body, but the soul. Beeswax became an essential material for cosmetics, sculpture, sealing, and structure. And beyond the physical, the bee carried meaning. In ritual, in myth, in art, religious ceremonies honoring bees and honey still echo in traditions today. The hive became a metaphor for society, for divine order, for resurrection. The bee, a messenger between worlds. Even the practice of moving hives to chase blossoms, first observed by Egyptians and Anatolians, now supports global agriculture. Today, commercial pollination depends on the ancient wisdom of following the bloom. The innovations of early beekeepers helped prepare us for modern ecological awareness. Now, as bees face new challenges, climate stress, habitat loss, disease, we are reminded how deeply we still depend on them. Despite all our technologies, this truth remains unchanged. Humans need bees, and bees have shaped us in return, culturally, economically, spiritually. The legacy of ancient apiculture is a testament to human insight, to our respect for nature, and to the quiet power of cooperation within the hive and across species. It reminds us that even the smallest creatures can inspire science, faith, and survival.